Okay, so the next person we're going to hear from is Dr. Brian Thom, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Victoria, who has worked for over 20 years as both an academic and tribal employee with Canadian First Nations, engaged in treaty, land claims, and self-government negotiations. In 2010, he founded UVic's Ethnographic Mapping Lab, which supports research, innovation, and collaboration for projects identified by Indigenous communities. The lab is committed to mobilizing the resulting work, including things like traditional land use geodata sets, Indigenous place names documentation, and interactive mapping video games in socially and culturally powerful ways. Please join me in welcoming Brian Thom.
It's just a great pleasure and honor to be here again at Geo for Good 2014. Seeing some familiar faces, and I'm looking forward to meeting many of you over the next few days.
Thank you.
And so I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me up and giving me a few minutes to offer a presentation on some of the work that we've been doing at the University of Victoria in Canada. And as Karen said, I've been working in Canadian First Nations communities now for the last 20 years. Working on many of the kinds of things that Steve was talking about, supporting Indigenous communities who are seeking the recognition of their Indigenous land rights and building the governance institutions in their communities. And also working on projects that have been identified in communities as important for revitalizing Indigenous languages and honoring Indigenous cultural practice and traditions in a modern context. And a lot of this work over the last 20 years has really involved mapping. And maps have really come, as we saw in Steve's talk, to be a very powerful means of focusing and having this dialogue. And 20 years ago, I was doing the mapping, likely as many of you, using Mylar and vellums and topographic base maps. And then introducing the GIS systems, and I've actually established 2 GIS offices in different First Nations communities in Canada. But I came about 5 years ago to realize that with these GIS systems, there's also an awful lot of technical capacity and skill that ends up being concentrated in the hands of very few people, and that there's a lot of power that can be held in using tools like Google Earth and Google Maps, and having community members be much more involved in producing and disseminating and trolling the kind of cultural map data that we're focused on. So I want to start my talk today by telling an example of a project that we're working on right now, in which we're using the new Google My Maps. I think this is an absolutely wonderful tool which allows for communities with absolutely no investment to make very powerful and sophisticated maps, in this case of important cultural places in the landscape. In the My Maps project that we're working on with the Smetis First Nation near Ladysmith, British Columbia in Canada, we have kids from the community going out and shooting high quality digital video with elders focused on looking at the Indigenous names for different places in the landscape and having the elders share with the youth about why these places are significant. And I want to give you a little example of what one of these short videos sounds like, so you can hear the kind of quality of the conversation that's happening between the youth and the kids. These conversations are recorded, they're uploaded on YouTube, and they're embedded in My Maps very simply at no cost to the community, which is very important. And I think you'll see in the video how powerful it is to hear these kind of words in the video beyond just having a label on a point on a map. And so I'll have you hear Willie Seymour talking about Che Mutston.
Around here is Yellow Point Lodge. But as you reach the line where the reservation starts, there's a place called Che Mutston. And that's where the story of when a person becomes orphaned, they lose their parent. Could be 1, 2 siblings, 2 siblings, 3 siblings. If they chose a certain medicine person, and if that was their area that they chose, that's where they went. Of course, there's several other places that they went to, but that's called Chayamachan, the place of tears.
So you can see the incredibly evocative kind of conversations that are happening between youth and elders in the community, and they're happening and they're focused around this project of doing these digital maps and bringing this kind of digital storytelling into this cultural map that the kids are working on producing for use in their communities, and also for educating the non-Aboriginal community, which lives in the towns and cities immediately around these, in which there are many misunderstandings and even some, I would say, latent racism in the communities, that we're working to help make these maps available for people so that they can start to understand more the place that they live, the very special places that they live in the communities. I've been working to go and train the youth on how to use these tools, whether it's working with My Maps or working with Google Earth, or even we did a nice project where we were using Google Map Maker to improve the Google base map in and around the lands of the Tz'minus First Nation, the Cowichan tribes. And I recently started working on some of these, this kind of endeavor in the Russian Far East in Kamchatka with an indigenous community there who was hoping to achieve very similar goals in language revitalization and celebration by connecting the youth and the elder people in documenting this kind of knowledge and presenting it through these maps. I've also find these tools very powerful for documenting Indigenous land use, occupancy, and cultural practices. And for here, we've really been focusing, as Steve talked about, on Google Earth as a remarkable tool for being able to fly through the landscape as we're talking to elders about important places, and putting the points on the land where they're talking about and recording the significance of those places, and also going out and collecting field data at places very systematically, where places people are harvesting traditional food, and recording those for these kinds of conversations that Steve was talking about with government, with land managers, with national parks agencies, and so on, so that we can enable First Nations to be involved in better decision-making, collaborative decision-making with governments and other partners. I've also been recently using Google Maps Views, which if any of you have not checked it out, you really should. It's an incredible, immersive environment for storytelling. And this is where you're able to have photospheres that you can build even with the simple app on your Android phone, and bring them up to views, get a beautiful photosphere of a place that you may have walked to or hiked to, or that in this case is a significant place for the Tz'minus First Nation, and then build a textual story along beside it that tells a bit of the history of why this is such an important place. And I think, again, trying to communicate with a broader public this kind of indigenous knowledge. And so finally, I would just say that I found the Ethnographic Mapping Lab at the University of Victoria, where we're very interested in having graduate students and undergraduate researchers work collaboratively with First Nations communities and Indigenous communities all over the world on projects like this. And I'm happy to say that about midnight last night, we launched the brand new website for the Ethnographic Mapping Lab in time for Geo for Good 2014. So I encourage you all to go to my new site and check it out. So thank you very much.